Have you ever wondered what it was like in the final days of Nazi Germany? What was the atmosphere like in Berlin as the Red Army closed in? As we turn the pages of history back to early 1945, we find ourselves in a world at war. Nazi Germany, once an imposing force, was now on the brink of collapse. The Red Army, under the command of generals like the formidable Georgy Zhukov and Ivan Konev, was poised to invade from the east. Meanwhile, the Allies were steadily advancing from the west. In the midst of this impending storm stood Berlin, a city preparing for the inevitable onslaught. The strategic situation was dire for the Germans. Their once formidable military might was now severely depleted, with the Red Army closing in on their capital. At this critical juncture, key German generals like Gotthard Heinrici, known for his defensive expertise, and Hans Krebs, a loyal supporter of Hitler, played pivotal roles. Heinrici, appointed as the commander of Army Group Vistula, was tasked with the defense of Berlin. Krebs, on the other hand, served as chief of the general staff of the German High Command, providing strategic advice to Hitler during these final days. While the German High Command was grappling with the impending crisis, the Russian generals were planning their assault. Zhukov, a decorated war hero, and Konev, a tough-as-nails commander, were both eyeing Berlin. The rivalry between these two generals was legendary, each vying to be the first to capture the German capital. The stage was being set for a battle of epic proportions. The German forces, though outnumbered and outgunned, were determined to defend their capital to the last man. The Red Army, on the other hand, was driven by a desire for retribution, fueled by the memories of the atrocities committed by the Nazis on their homeland. As the Red Army advanced, the stage was set for one of the deadliest battles in history. The Reichstag, the symbol of German power, stood as a key objective for the Red Army. It was the spring of 1945, the final days of the Second World War. The Red Army, under the command of General Georgy Zhukov, approached the Reichstag with a grim determination. The Russian soldiers were all too aware that this was not just another building. It was a symbol, a metaphor for the heart of the Nazi regime. Yet, the Reichstag was not to be taken easily. The German forces, led by General Helmut Weidling, put up a fierce resistance. The initial attempts by the Red Army to storm the Reichstag were met with brutal counterattacks, resulting in heavy casualties. The Reichstag, a grand architectural marvel, had turned into a fortress of despair, echoing with the sounds of gunfire and explosions. Despite the odds, the Red Army did not retreat. They regrouped, re-strategized, and launched a relentless assault. They fought floor by floor, room by room, in what came to be known as some of the most intense urban warfare in history. Their bravery and tenacity were driven by a single goal: to hoist the Soviet flag atop the Reichstag. And then, on the night of April 30th, 1945, amidst the smoke and the rubble, a young Soviet soldier, Mikhail Minin, climbed the ruins of the Reichstag and planted the red flag. It was a moment that resonated far beyond the battle-scarred streets of Berlin. It was a symbolic gesture that echoed across the world, signaling the imminent end of the Nazi regime. Yet, the battle was far from over. The German forces, though significantly weakened, continued to resist in pockets across the city. But the tide had turned. The fall of the Reichstag marked the beginning of the end, a crushing blow to the Third Reich. With the Reichstag in their hands, the Soviets were one step closer to victory. The fall of the Reichstag was a pivotal moment in the Battle of Berlin, a turning point that marked the final stages of a war that had ravaged the world for 6 long years. As the fighting raged around the Reichstag, a separate battle unfolded in the Tiergarten. In the heart of Berlin, the Tiergarten, a once serene park, was transformed into a brutal theater of war. This expansive green space, a stone's throw away from the Reichstag, became a battleground as intense as any seen during the Second World War. Imagine this, a park known for its tranquility and beauty, now echoing with the sounds of gunfire, explosions, and the cries of the wounded. The once lush greenery was replaced by the stark grays of destruction. The once leisurely paths were littered with the debris of war. German defenders, a mix of hardened veterans, hastily trained Volkssturm, and Hitler Youth, turned every tree, every bush, every monument into a defensive position. They fought with a desperation born of the knowledge that defeat meant the end of their country as they knew it. On the other side, the Soviet Red Army, battle-hardened and unyielding, relentlessly pushed forward. They were driven by a thirst for victory and revenge for the immense suffering their country had endured. Under the command of Marshal Georgy Zhukov, they waged brutal urban warfare, street by street, square by square. The battle was a testament to the human capacity for endurance and courage. The German defenders, vastly outnumbered and outgunned, fought with a tenacity that surprised their enemies. Meanwhile, the Soviet soldiers, despite facing a determined enemy in a hostile urban environment, never wavered in their advance. In the end, the Tiergarten became a microcosm of the larger Battle of Berlin. It was a scene of fierce resistance, of immense courage, and ultimately, of the relentless march of the Red Army towards victory. The park that was once a symbol of peace and leisure bore witness to the harsh realities of war, serving as a stark reminder of the cost of conflict. The Tiergarten, once a place of leisure, had become a battlefield. While the battle raged on the streets, another drama was unfolding in Hitler's bunker. As the Soviet forces closed in on the heart of Berlin, Adolf Hitler, the man who had brought Europe to its knees, was living out his final days underground. Hitler had made the decision to remain in Berlin, a choice that was as defiant as it was futile. The city was crumbling around him, yet he refused to leave his crumbling Reich. In the bunker, the atmosphere was tense and somber. Among the key figures sharing Hitler's last days were Joseph Goebbels, the Reich's Minister of Propaganda, and Martin Bormann, Hitler's private secretary. These men, loyal to the end, were witnesses to the Führer's last act of defiance. Amid the chaos, Hitler found a moment of quiet to marry his longtime companion, Eva Braun. The ceremony was a brief respite from the harsh reality outside, a moment of normalcy in a world gone mad. Their marriage, however, was short-lived. Less than 48 hours later, both Hitler and Braun would be dead. Hitler's final act was one of self-destruction. He and Braun committed suicide in a small study within the bunker. Hitler shot himself, Braun ingested cyanide. Their bodies were later found by aides and, as per Hitler's orders, were hastily cremated in the Chancellery Garden. With Hitler's suicide, the last vestiges of the Nazi regime began to crumble. Goebbels assumed the role of Chancellor, but his reign was short-lived. He and his wife would follow Hitler in suicide, leaving their 6 children orphaned and the Nazi administration in disarray. Martin Bormann, the man who had once been at Hitler's side, disappeared in the chaos following Hitler's death. His fate would remain a mystery for years, fueling speculation and conspiracy theories. With Hitler's death, the Nazi regime was leaderless. The Führer's end was the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. The battle for Berlin would continue to rage on, but without its leader, the Third Reich was now a headless beast, lurching towards its inevitable demise. In the early hours of May 2, 1945, Berlin finally fell. The once mighty German capital, now a battered and broken city, succumbed to the relentless Soviet forces. The man responsible for orchestrating the city's defense, General Helmuth Weidling, had no choice but to surrender. He issued a final order to his troops, instructing them to cease resistance and surrender peacefully to the Soviets. Yet, not all Germans were ready to bow down. Some continued to fight, unwilling to accept the inevitable, while others, overwhelmed with despair and fear, chose to end their lives rather than face the impending Soviet occupation. It was a grim and chaotic scene, a stark contrast to the disciplined and orderly German forces that had marched into countless cities just a few years earlier. Meanwhile, the Soviet forces, led by Marshal Georgy Zhukov, celebrated their hard-earned victory. As the first rays of daylight pierced the smoke-filled skies of Berlin, Soviet soldiers planted their red flag atop the Reichstag, a symbolic gesture marking the end of the Battle of Berlin. Yet, the victory was not without its cost. Thousands of Soviet soldiers had lost their lives in this brutal battle, a testament to the ferocity and desperation of the final days of the Third Reich. As the dust settled, the initial Soviet occupation of Berlin began. The city, once the heart of Nazi Germany, was now under the control of their sworn enemy. The Soviets set about restoring order, a daunting task given the extensive damage and the volatile situation. Despite the hardships, Berliners began the arduous process of rebuilding their shattered city and their lives. The Battle of Berlin marked the end of an era. It was a testament to the horrors of war, but also to the resilience of the human spirit. In the face of adversity and despair, the people of Berlin found the strength to endure, to rebuild, and to move forward. Their story serves as a poignant reminder of the cost of war and the indomitable will of the human spirit.